I will call security if you don't leave with that dog right now. The restaurant manager's voice cut through the lunch hour chatter like a knife, turning heads at every table. In the sudden hush that followed, all eyes turned to the corner booth where an older man sat motionless, his weathered hand resting gently on the back of a Belgian Malinois, wearing a vest clearly marked Service Dog, Do Not Disturb. The veteran didn't respond immediately. He simply looked down at his companion, his fingers tracing the embroidered letters as if drawing strength from them. But less than 2 hours later, that same restaurant would fall into a different kind of silence, one born not of curiosity, but of shame, when 5 men in United States Marine Corps dress blues walked through those doors. Daniel Carson was 62 years old, though some days he felt like he'd lived 3 lifetimes. His steel gray hair, still cut high and tight in the military style he'd worn for 23 years, contrasted sharply with the deep lines etched around his eyes, lines that told stories of sleepless nights in desert outposts, of explosions that still echoed in his nightmares, of friends who never made it home. He walked with a slight limp, favoring his left leg. 6 inches of titanium rod held together what was left of his femur, shattered by shrapnel from an IED on a dusty road outside Kandahar. The phantom pain some mornings was so intense that he had to sit on the edge of his bed for 20 minutes before he could stand. Daniel didn't talk about it. Not to his neighbors, not to the checkout clerk at the grocery store, not even to his sister in Ohio who called every Sunday evening like clockwork. But Rocky knew. For 8 years, the Belgian Malinois had been Daniel's constant companion, his anchor to reality when the past threatened to pull him under. Rocky was 12 now, his muzzle graying to match Daniel's hair, but his amber eyes remained sharp and vigilant. The dog could sense the subtle changes in Daniel's breathing that preceded a panic attack. He could detect the chemical shift in Daniel's sweat when anxiety spiked. When Daniel's hands began to tremble, Rocky would immediately apply deep pressure therapy, pressing his warm body against Daniel's legs, grounding him before the flashbacks took hold. Rocky wasn't just a pet. He was a highly trained medical service animal with a singular purpose: to keep Daniel Carson alive. It was a Tuesday in October when Daniel pushed open the heavy wooden door of the Blue Water Grill. The restaurant was moderately busy, and he requested a corner table, somewhere quiet, back to the wall, clear line of sight to the entrance. Old habits. The young hostess, Emma, seated them perfectly. Rocky immediately moved to position himself between Daniel's feet under the table, his body forming a warm, steady presence that was almost invisible to the other diners. When the waitress, Ashley, approached with water and a menu, her smile faltered as her gaze dropped to Rocky. She glanced over her shoulder toward the kitchen, then back to Daniel, her voice suddenly strained. I'll be right back with your water." She hurried away, not toward the kitchen, but toward a door marked office. Daniel's chest tightened. He knew what was coming. He'd been through this before, at a movie theater in Richmond, at a coffee shop in Virginia Beach, at a shopping mall food court. Rocky sensed the tension, his head lifting, nose pressing gently against Daniel's calf. A reminder to breathe, to stay present. "It's okay, boy," Daniel murmured. "We've been through worse, haven't we?" The manager who emerged was younger than Daniel expected, maybe 35, with carefully styled hair and a crisp white shirt. His name tag read Brandon Mitchell, General Manager, and he walked to Daniel's table with purposeful stride, his voice deliberately loud enough to carry to surrounding tables. "Sir, I'm afraid we have a strict no-pets policy in this establishment. Health code regulations. I'm going to have to ask you to remove the animal from the premises." Daniel took a slow breath, keeping his voice calm. "Rocky isn't a pet. He's a service animal. I have documentation if you'd like to see it." He produced a laminated card from the Department of Veterans Affairs identifying Rocky as a registered service animal for PTSD and mobility assistance, along with a letter from his psychiatrist at the VA hospital. Brandon waved his hand dismissively without looking at the documents. "I'm sure those are very nice, sir, but policy is policy. We have other customers to consider, and not everyone is comfortable around dogs. The Americans with Disabilities Act protects my right to be accompanied by my service animal in all public accommodations," Daniel said quietly. "Rocky is trained, certified, and performing a medical function." Brandon's jaw tightened. "I understand you may believe that, but I have a responsibility to all my patrons. Perhaps you could enjoy your meal on our patio." From a nearby table, a woman in designer sunglasses leaned toward her companion, her voice carrying clearly. "I agree with the manager. A dog is a dog, military or not. What if it has fleas? The restaurant had grown quieter. Other diners pretended to focus on their meals, but Daniel could feel their sideways glances. A teenager in a booth near the window had her phone out, angled toward their table. Brandon crossed his arms. "Sir, I don't want to make this uncomfortable, but if you refuse to comply, I will have to call the authorities." Daniel looked down at Rocky. Those amber eyes gazed back steadily, patiently, with absolute trust. In those eyes, Daniel saw echoes of another time. A collapsed building in Helmand Province, flames licking at walls, smoke thick enough to choke on. Rocky had found him pinned under a fallen beam, had barked and refused to leave until help arrived, had stayed by the stretcher during the helicopter evacuation. Rocky had saved his life. Not once, but dozens of times, on the battlefield and off it. Daniel slowly rose to his feet, his leg protesting with a sharp jolt of pain. Rocky stood in perfect synchronization, moving to heel position without needing a command. "This dog," Daniel said softly but with steel underneath, "pulled me out of a burning building while mortars were falling all around us. He stood between me and enemy fire more times than I can count. He's prevented me from taking my own life on at least 3 occasions when the weight of what I've seen became too much to carry." He paused, maintaining eye contact with Brandon. "I won't abandon him because you find his existence inconvenient." The restaurant was dead silent. Brandon's face had gone pale. There's no need to be dramatic, sir. I'm just enforcing restaurant policy." "Then your policy is wrong," Daniel said simply. He placed a $10 bill on the table. "Keep the change. Consider it payment for the education you just received." He turned and walked toward the exit, Rocky maintaining position at his side. The dog's gait adjusted to match Daniel's uneven stride. The October air hit Daniel's face as he pushed through the door. Near the restaurant entrance, an elderly couple who had been about to enter froze. The man, maybe 70, with a Vietnam veteran's cap, caught Daniel's eye. There was a flash of recognition there, veteran to veteran. But the couple turned and walked away, heads down, avoiding confrontation. Daniel didn't blame them. Fighting other people's battles got exhausting. Near the entrance, a group of college students congregated, scrolling through their phones. As Daniel passed, one looked up and elbowed his friend. "Check it out," he said, not quite quiet enough. "Old dude thinks his emotional support animal is like special forces or something." His friend snickered. "Probably another PTSD case who makes up war stories. Emotional support animals aren't even legally protected in restaurants." The words landed like punches. Daniel kept walking, his jaw tight, his hand finding Rocky's head as if the dog were a lifeline. He reached a bench in the small park across the street and lowered himself onto it with a barely suppressed groan. Rocky immediately sat at his feet, leaning his weight against Daniel's good leg. More pressure therapy, applied without fanfare. From his jacket pocket, Daniel pulled out a brown paper bag containing a tuna sandwich. He tore it in half and offered one portion to Rocky, who accepted it gently, eating slowly while his eyes constantly returned to Daniel's face. A young mother pushed a stroller past, her toddler pointing excitedly at Rocky. The mother's hand shot out, grabbing the child's arm, her eyes darting nervously to Daniel. "Don't point, sweetie. We don't approach strange dogs or strange men." Daniel pulled out his wallet and extracted a worn photograph. A younger Daniel, bleeding and barely conscious, being loaded onto a stretcher. Rocky, less gray then, stood guard beside the stretcher. Around Rocky's neck hung special tags identifying him as a member of K9 Unit Bravo, deployed to Helmand Province. The dog had commendations some human soldiers never received. Purple Heart recipient, Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal, 7 confirmed life saves not including Daniel's. But none of that mattered to a restaurant manager protecting his precious health codes. "Kicked out again, huh?" Daniel whispered to the photograph. Rocky responded by laying his head on Daniel's knee, a gesture unchanged whether they were in a desert outpost or an American park. Loyalty didn't recognize geography. A bus rumbled past with an advertisement. "Honor our veterans. They fought for your freedom." The irony wasn't lost on Daniel. Inside the Blue Water Grill, the lunch rush was beginning to thin out. Brandon Mitchell had retreated to his office, pleased with how he'd handled the situation. At 2:15 p.m., the door opened. 5 men entered, moving with the distinctive precision of military personnel in United States Marine Corps dress blues. Conversations died mid-sentence. Silverware paused halfway to mouths. The Marines didn't scan the room for tables. They moved in formation straight to the hostess stand. The lead Marine stepped forward, tall, maybe 6'2", with the bearing of command. His name tag read Macmillan, and captain's insignia marked his shoulders. His chest displayed ribbons, combat action ribbon, Afghanistan campaign medal, and others marking him as someone who'd seen combat. "Good afternoon," Captain Macmillan said, his voice carrying quiet authority. "I'm Captain James Macmillan, commanding officer of Bravo Unit, 1st Marine Special Operations Battalion. I'm looking for Daniel Carson and his service dog, Rocky." Emma, the hostess, stood frozen. They're not here. They left about an hour ago. Kicked out, weren't they?" This came from the Marine to the captain's left, a gunnery sergeant with Rodriguez on his name tag and a scar running from temple to jaw. Brandon Mitchell emerged from his office, stopping dead when he saw the Marines. "Gentlemen, how can I help you?" "You refused service to Sergeant Daniel Carson and his K-9 partner, Rocky," Captain Macmillan said, his tone neutral but edged. "Is that correct?" "There was a misunderstanding about restaurant policy," Brandon said. "We have health regulations. Sergeant Carson saved the lives of 4 men in my unit during an ambush outside Kandahar," Captain Macmillan interrupted. "His K-9 partner, Rocky, has more confirmed life saves than most combat medics. Rocky holds the rank of sergeant in our records and has been awarded the Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal for actions in combat." He paused, letting the information sink into the absolute silence. "And your establishment just treated an American hero like a criminal for having the audacity to bring his medical service animal into your restaurant." The woman with designer sunglasses stared at her salad as if it might offer escape, her face ashen. One of the Marines raised his phone. "Sir, I've already posted about this incident to the Southeastern Veterans Support Network. About 15,000 members across 3 states. They're not happy." Brandon's face drained of color. "Please, there's been a misunderstanding. We didn't know." "That's exactly the problem," Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez cut in. "You shouldn't need to know someone's service record to treat them with basic human dignity." Captain Macmillan pulled out a photograph, Rocky in full tactical gear with his unit. Below the image, SGT Rocky Bravo Unit Semper Fi. He placed it on the hostess stand with the careful precision of someone leaving flowers at a grave. "This isn't about restaurant policy. This is about what we value as a society. By refusing them service, you told a decorated veteran that his disability is an inconvenience. You reinforced every feeling of isolation that drives veterans to give up entirely." He looked around the now silent restaurant. "You can't make this right with a free meal. But you can start by educating yourself and your staff about the Americans with Disabilities Act, about service animals, and about treating veterans with the respect they've earned." Ashley, the waitress, suddenly stepped forward. "Wait. Please wait." The Marines paused. Ashley grabbed a takeout container and rushed to fill it with items from the kitchen. Pan-seared scallops, grilled fish, fresh bread, key lime pie. "Please," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Please give this to Mr. Carson and Rocky. Tell them I'm sorry. Tell them we were wrong." She scribbled on paper and tucked it under the lid. "We were wrong. Please let us try to do better." Captain Macmillan accepted the container with a slight nod. "I'll make sure they get it." As the Marines left, the restaurant remained silent. Then, slowly, people started talking, not about their meals, but about what they'd just witnessed, about what they'd allowed to happen earlier, about their own complicity. The teenager who'd been recording looked at her phone, at the video of Daniel's humiliation, and with shaking fingers, she deleted it. Across the street, Daniel sat on his bench, checking Rocky's paws, a daily ritual, when he noticed movement. 5 Marines in dress blues walking toward him. Daniel's heart rate spiked. Multiple people approaching. But then he saw the ribbons, the insignia, the bearing. Not a threat. Brothers. He stood as they approached, his posture unconsciously shifting to something resembling attention. Captain Macmillan stopped and rendered a crisp salute. "Sergeant Carson." "It's an honor, sir." Daniel, stunned, returned the salute. Do I know you, Captain?" "Not personally, sir. But you know my men. You saved them." He gestured to the others. Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez, Corporal Davis, Lance Corporal Chin. They were part of the convoy you pulled out of that kill zone outside Kandahar in 2019. Rodriguez stepped forward. "You carried me 200 yards under enemy fire, Sergeant. You and Rocky cleared the area while incoming rounds were kicking up dust at your feet." Daniel's eyes widened. "The bridge ambush. 2nd Battalion." "Yes, sir." Understanding passed between them. The weight of survival, the burden of memory, the guilt of coming home when others didn't. "We heard about what happened at the restaurant," Captain Macmillan said. Unacceptable. We wanted you to know that your brothers haven't forgotten what you and Rocky did. We haven't forgotten what you continued to do every day, surviving. He held out the container Ashley had prepared. The staff asked us to bring you this. Daniel accepted it with shaking hands. He opened it, saw the scallops, and nearly broke. Rocky stood and pressed against his leg, grounding him. Thank you, Daniel managed. You didn't have to. Yes, we did, Rodriguez said. Brothers don't leave brothers behind, even stateside. They spent the next hour together, 6 men and 1 dog, sharing stories in the way only veterans can. Not about heroism or glory, but about survival, about pushing through one more day, about finding purpose after the mission ended. Have you thought about speaking to veteran groups? Captain McMillan asked. Sharing your experience? Daniel shrugged. Who wants to hear from an old Marine who can't even get a meal without causing a scene? More people than you think. The captain handed him a business card. We run a monthly gathering for Iraq and Afghanistan veterans. We could use someone like you. Daniel tucked the card into his wallet. I'll think about it. As the sun began to descend, the Marines eventually said their goodbyes, each shaking Daniel's hand and offering Rocky a respectful pat. Captain McMillan was the last to leave. That restaurant manager? He resigned this afternoon. Daniel nodded slowly, feeling no satisfaction, just hollow awareness that another person had learned a hard lesson. The next morning, Daniel's phone rang. Mr. Carson? This is Margaret Chin, owner of Blue Water Grill. Her voice was careful, weighted. I wanted to call you personally to apologize. What happened was completely unacceptable. Daniel listened. My father was a Marine. 3 tours in Vietnam. He came home with scars, some visible, some not. He struggled with PTSD, though back then they just called it being difficult. He died 10 years ago, and I've wondered every day if I could have done more to understand. Her voice cracked. I should have trained my staff better. I'm implementing mandatory training on the Americans with Disabilities Act and service animals. But more than that, I'd like to invite you to a community event next week. A veteran appreciation dinner, not as publicity, but as a genuine attempt to do better. Daniel looked at Rocky. I'll think about it. Thank you. That's all I can ask. And Mr. Carson? Your meals are always complimentary at Blue Water Grill. Not as payment, nothing can pay for what happened, but as a standing invitation. You're always welcome. The following Tuesday evening, Daniel stood outside Blue Water Grill, his heart pounding. Rocky pressed against his leg, offering silent support. The window displayed a new sign. We proudly welcome all veterans and their service companions. Below it, handmade with children's writing. Thank you, soldiers and hero dogs. He pushed open the door. The restaurant had been transformed. American flags hung respectfully along one wall. A corner table had a small brass plaque. Daniel Carson and SGT. Rocky, K9 Unit Bravo, never forgotten. A display showed photographs of military working dogs throughout history, with Rocky's photo at the center, professionally framed, with brothers engraved below. Emma approached with a genuine smile. Mr. Carson, welcome back. She knelt to Rocky's level. And hello, Sergeant Rocky. We have fresh grilled salmon for you, plain, just how working dogs prefer it. Margaret Chin emerged, extending her hand. Thank you for coming, for giving us this chance. The restaurant wasn't empty. Several tables held veterans, some with service animals, others with visible prosthetics. There was a table of Vietnam vets, gray-haired and weathered. Younger groups with the same 1,000-yard stare Daniel saw in his mirror. A female veteran with a service dog like Rocky. They noticed Daniel and Rocky. Heads nodded in recognition. One older vet raised his water glass in subtle salute. Daniel returned the gesture. Over dinner, the scallops were as good as promised, and Rocky received his salmon. Daniel found himself in conversation with other veterans. They shared stories of struggle, dealing with the VA, managing medications, explaining to family why certain sounds triggered panic. A Vietnam vet named Frank leaned over. It's different now, seeing the welcome you younger guys get. We came home to protests and spit. I'm glad you're getting better, even if it took too long. Daniel shook his head. It's not better. It's just different. They thank us for our service, then ignore us when we need help. A young Marine, maybe 25, approached hesitantly. Sir, I heard what happened last week. Thank you for standing your ground. He gestured to his German shepherd. This is Bella. We've been kicked out of places too. It helps to know I'm not alone. You're never alone, Daniel said firmly. We still have each other's backs. Semper Fi, sir. Semper Fi. Margaret made a brief announcement, unveiling a new policy board. Blue Water Grill Veteran Commitment. All veterans eat free on Veterans Day and Memorial Day. Service animals welcome always, no questions asked. 10% veteran discount year-round. Monthly veteran community dinners. We are a veteran-friendly space. But more importantly, she announced a partnership with the local VA to provide employment opportunities for veterans. The restaurant erupted in applause. Daniel's vision blurred with unexpected tears. Rocky immediately stood and pressed against his leg. "I'm okay, boy," Daniel whispered. "These are good tears." A young mother approached with her son, maybe 7. "My son wanted to ask you something, if that's okay?" Daniel knelt down. "Is he a hero dog?" the boy asked. "He's the biggest hero I know. He saved my life more times than I can count." "Does he have superpowers?" "Better than superpowers. Loyalty, courage, and a heart bigger than most humans. He never gives up, never complains, never leaves his friends behind." "Can I pet him?" "First, ask Rocky's permission. Hold your hand out and let him sniff you." The boy extended his hand with solemn seriousness. Rocky sniffed, then stepped forward, tail wagging gently. "He says yes," Daniel translated. As the child's fingers touched Rocky's head, something shifted in Daniel's chest. This child would remember this moment. He'd remember that veterans weren't scary, that service dogs weren't to be feared. Maybe that was how things changed, not through grand gestures, but through small moments of connection, one person at a time. 3 months later, Daniel stood at a podium in the community center adjacent to Blue Water Grill. 50 people filled the room. Rocky lay at his feet, calm and attentive. "I'm not a hero," Daniel began. "I'm just a Marine who did his job and came home different. I'm a man who struggles to sleep, who panics in crowds, who sometimes can't tell the difference between fireworks and incoming mortars." He looked at Rocky. "This dog kept me alive. Not just in Afghanistan, but every day since. When the darkness gets too heavy, Rocky is there. He doesn't judge. He doesn't demand explanations. He just is. And somehow that's enough." Daniel talked about the ambush, the explosion, the flames and screaming, Rocky refusing to leave his side. He talked about coming home, the divorce, the lost jobs, the VA appointments. And he talked about that day at Blue Water Grill. "I've been kicked out of places before, called a faker. But something different happened that day. Brothers showed up. The community stood up. People chose to learn." He gestured around the room. "That's what I want you to understand. We don't need parades. We need understanding. We need patience. We need you to believe us when we say we need our service animals. We need to be seen as humans first, veterans second, and problems never." The woman who'd pulled her child away that day in the park stood. "I was there. I pulled my son away because I was scared. I'd heard stories about violent veterans. I didn't see a person who'd served. I saw a threat." Tears streamed down her face. "I was wrong. I taught my son to fear you instead of respect you. I'm sorry." Daniel nodded. "Fear comes from not understanding. But now you're here learning. That's what matters." The college student who'd mocked Daniel stood next. "I was an idiot. I posted jokes about stolen valor and fake service dogs. My uncle, who served in Iraq, saw it. He told me about his service dog, about how she's the only reason he's still alive." His voice broke. "I'm sorry, sir." Daniel descended from the podium and extended his hand. "You learned. You changed. That takes courage too." They shook hands, and Daniel saw genuine remorse, genuine growth. 2 years after that day at Blue Water Grill, Daniel stood at another podium, the Virginia State Capitol. Beside him was Atlas, a young Belgian Malinois in training. Rocky had passed peacefully 6 months earlier, lying in his favorite spot, his head on Daniel's lap, sunset painting the sky. Daniel had held him until the end, whispering, "Good boy. You're such a good boy." The grief had nearly broken him. But the community Rocky had helped build didn't let him drown. Veterans called, visited, checked in. And slowly, painfully, Daniel had found his way back through training Atlas, through returning to speaking engagements. Now he testified in support of the Service Animals in Public Accommodations Act, legislation that would strengthen protections for service animals and their handlers. "Sergeant Rocky saved my life more times than I can count," Daniel told the legislators. "But he taught me something else too, about loyalty that doesn't waver, about love that asks nothing except to be allowed to serve." He looked at Atlas. Service animals aren't pets. They're highly trained medical equipment that happens to have fur and heartbeats. They're the difference between a veteran functioning and becoming another suicide statistic. His voice strengthened. When you deny a veteran with a service animal access to public spaces, you're not enforcing health codes. You're telling a disabled person their medical needs matter less than someone's comfort. You're saying their sacrifice bought freedom for everyone except themselves. The legislation passed unanimously. It was named the Rocky Act. After the vote, a young woman with a golden retriever approached Daniel, crying quietly, not sadness, but relief. "Thank you," she whispered. "We got kicked out of a restaurant last month. They said my PTSD wasn't real enough. I felt so ashamed." "You're not broken," Daniel said firmly. "You're wounded. There's a difference. Wounded things heal, even if they carry scars." She knelt to pet Atlas. "Does it get easier?" "It gets different. You learn which battles to fight. You learn that some people will never understand, and that's okay because enough people will. You learn your worth isn't determined by whether strangers validate your wounds." He helped her stand. "And you learn you're not alone. There's a whole community of us, fighting different battles now but still fighting. Still serving, just in different ways." That evening, Daniel returned to Blue Water Grill for the monthly veteran dinner. The restaurant had expanded, walls covered with photos of veterans who'd found community there. Rocky's photo held the place of honor with a new plaque. SGT. Rocky, he taught us that loyalty knows no limits, that service continues long after the mission ends, and that the greatest victories are the quiet ones fought in everyday moments. Frank, the Vietnam vet, raised his glass. Others followed, creating a silent toast to absent friends. "To Rocky," someone called out. "To Rocky," the room echoed. In that moment, in that community built on respect and understanding, Daniel finally understood what coming home really meant. It wasn't about returning to the place you'd left unchanged. Coming home was about building something new, about finding your people, the ones who understood, who stood beside you even when the battles were invisible. Coming home was about taking your brokenness and using it to light the way for others still finding their path. Coming home was about discovering that the end of one mission was the beginning of another. Daniel had come home, finally, fully, completely, and Rocky, dear, devoted, heroic Rocky, had carried him every step of the way. For every veteran still fighting their way home, and for every service animal who lights their path. You are not alone. You are not forgotten. Your service matters. You matter.